Welcome to the YB Min Monthly Lecture Series, offered by the Center for Asian Business at Loyola Marymount University and funded by a grant from the International Communication Foundation of Seoul, Korea.
Before I introduce how I want to approach this hour we're going to have together, I'd like to find out a little bit more about you. That helps me understand how I can best serve you. So, first of all, how many of you are undergraduate students at LMU here? Almost everybody. Okay. Now, do you call the student a junior, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior? Yes. Okay. So how many seniors do we have? Okay. All right. Now, of you seniors, how many of you know where you're going in life? Good. Well, in the back, where you going? You're going directly to jail. Where are you going? In the back. Where are you going? Way in the back. With the stripe, yeah, the polo shirt. Yeah, that's right.
I'm going into management.
You are?
That's why I'm paying all this money, I hope.
Going to management. All right. How many of you think you might go into international affairs in some way, shape? Like, what would you do? What would you do? This lady right here. Yes.
I want to work in international agricultural development.
Oh, that's a great field. That's a great field. Do you plan to go to graduate work in that? Do you have a graduate school picked out?
Oregon State.
Oregon State. Okay, I thought it might be Cornell, but Oregon State. That's a great field because so many of these economies are dependent on the agricultural factor, and even in this age of industrialization. And the fellow next to you is interested in international. Where are you going to go?
Just general business in Asia.
Really?
China, Korea.
You want to be rich, or you already are rich? You want to be richer. Okay, good. No, that's all right. You know, it's better to be rich is glorious, as Deng Xiaoping said. You know. What else we got? Anyone else going international field? Yes, tell us about yourself.
I'm a sophomore international business major.
Right.
I'm not sure really which direction I'm going to go yet.
Right. Why? What is it though about it, the international field, just in general, that sort of interests you?
I lived overseas a lot of my life, and I lived in Singapore most recently.
Oh, is that right? I'm writing a book about Kuan Yew. In Singapore. I'll tell you about later if you're interested. But is that because your parents moved around? Were you an army brat?
Oil.
Oil brat. Oh, okay, good. So you're rich. Is anybody about to make the mistake of wanting to go into journalism? Yes, I said one hand, 10 like that. You're only going to halfway into journalism or the whole way?
I want to become an international correspondent.
You do?
Yeah.
Well, you know, how can I discourage you? No, no, I have very mixed feelings about it, and I wrote a book which my students at UCLA used to call quite accurately, and not for any other reason, the world's greatest book. It's called Confessions of an American Media Man, and to incentivize you to ask good questions when the question period comes, because there's nothing more devastating for a speaker when you say, all right, now questions, and people go, you know, like that. So I'm going to incentivize you. I'm going to give out 3 copies of the world's greatest book in English. And then, for those of you who are bilingual, this is just published, the Korean version was published in Seoul, and I don't know what it says. You know, I have no idea, but there's maybe a typo here on page 123. But I'm going to give that out free of charge, so pay attention. And just one second. I lost all my notes. What other fields quickly are we planning to go into? Just throw out some fields. Anybody going to go into law? Come on, admit it. Way in the back. Any particular law? Just law that makes money, or a particular field? Human rights. That's a terrific. You won't make any money in that field at all, but you might save some lives. My only point is to do this is that, and I am more interested probably in this than you are. It always helps me when I taught for 15 years at UCLA to understand where you're coming from. That way, whatever marginal benefit I can be to you is informed by where you're coming from. And so, as I talk about the topic tonight, which is the 2 Koreas, I wanted to see how many of you have an internationalist bent. Because after all, if you're completely uninterested in the world out there, why should you be interested in Korea? Right? And then if you are interested in the world out there, why in particular should you be interested in Korea? And now I need to tell you a little bit about myself so that you can understand why I'm interested in Korea. Basically, the topic that's been given to me by Teresa Shim and Father Daly is a huge one. Even though it says the two Koreas, it's a huge one, and I could really take a semester of your time and, as little as I know, fill that semester. Although one could argue that fortunately this isn't a semester talk, so you don't find out how little I really know. I only have an hour to be with you. So no one asked me to do that. And there are some people in here who know more about Korea, such as these two gentlemen just coming in here from the Republic of Korea, the consulate. They know more about Korea. They've forgotten more about Korea than I'll ever know. These are high-level and hard-working diplomats from Republic of Korea who were stationed here in Los Angeles, and colleagues of mine, and they were honored me by being here. And I'll ask them not to ask any questions because they know so much, they'll stump me easily. To make me even more humble, if I can put it to you that way, I come to you as a humble American journalist, which is to say that my perspective is not the perspective of the historians or the sociologists, although, and even though I did my undergraduate work in political science and I did my graduate work in international relations, really my perspective is the perspective of a journalist. And my approach tonight will be to explain a journalist's perspective on the issue of the two Koreas. Does anybody know what I mean when I say I have a journalist perspective? What would I mean by that? Would I mean I'm superficial? Would it mean I'm, you know, vulgar and exaggerated? What would it mean to have a journalist perspective? How about the lady, who is it wants to be an international journalist? Somebody? Yeah, what would that mean? What do you think? What does it mean to be a journalist?
I don't know. You tell the things, you tell the stories of what's going on around the rest of the world so everyone can know.
Yeah, that's very good, actually. You tell the stories. And what kind of stories? You tell stories that are 50 years old or 100 years old? No, you tell stories that are what? Current. That's exactly right. We don't, what journalists, both the beauty and the beast of journalism is that it's of the moment. It's of the now. And our job is to try and tell you what's going on now and to put it into some kind of context so that you can understand it. Now, what are the dangers of that? Well, the dangers of that is that there's a really good chance that we could be wrong. Maybe not with the facts, but with the interpretation. And so as I talk to you about North Korea and South Korea, you have to understand that I want to be the first to admit to you I could be wrong. One reason I could be wrong is because I'm giving it to you now. I'm not taking another month or another year. I'm not an historian writing about the Renaissance. You follow me? As a journalist, I'm saying what is going on now and how I look at it, how I interpret it. Now, I do a particular kind of journalism, which is opinion journalism, which is to say I do the reporting. I've probably been to Asia at least 100 times on reporting trips. I'm going to Malaysia in 2 weeks for a book. I was in Singapore just 3 weeks ago, the second trip this summer, and all that. And if you look at my passport, it's in volume 3. You know, you get extra pages. But still, it's because it's of the moment, the judgment has to be tentative, and the judgment has to be approximate, and it has to be presented to you with a degree of humility, which is to say, this is the best I can do for you now. Give me 100 years, and I can give you a more focused perspective. Well, what's the problem if you wait 100 years? A, you'll be dead, probably, right? And B, it will be not timely, right? It'll be sort of late news, you see? So that's the conundrum, that's the challenge, that's the precipice, that's the paradox of journalism. And international journalism is particularly difficult because frankly, it's more complicated than covering the local school board. You know? It's more covering international relations and covering different cultures and ethical systems and norms and so forth is tremendously complicated. And I wouldn't be surprised if my good friends, for instance, from the Republic of Korea, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when they read my columns, of course they're diplomats and they're very polite, you know, and they wouldn't say anything negative, But in Korean, which I don't understand, they're probably saying, can you believe what he thinks? This is really, that's an American view. You know, and some of that would probably be true, right? But the alternative is, if I don't take a chance and I don't take a shot, right, what do you got? You got nothing. So it's you know, journalism is a rough first draft of history, and now we're going to do a rough first draft of history about Korea. Now, you know, I was asked if I was going to do a PowerPoint. And I don't know about you, but whenever I'm at a lecture and I see PowerPoint, I get a tremendous desire to sleep. Does that ever happen? Right? No PowerPoint. We're not doing PowerPoint tonight. And I'm sorry you have to look at me. We could do a hell of a lot better than that. But one thing is, I do have a tie on, which I almost never do in Los Angeles, because this tie actually was given to me as a gift by the president of, the late president, Kim Dae-jung of South Korea. Does anyone here speak, you read Korean, anybody? What does it say here? Because you know, it doesn't say Saks Fifth Avenue. What does it say?
Oh, it says the Blue House.
The Blue House. What's the Blue House?
The White House of Korea.
The White House of Korea, except that it's blue. There you go. The blue. That's why they call it the Blue House. Very clever of them, isn't it? Now, we're going to talk about the two Koreas. And first of all, you need to see, in my very sophisticated graphic presentation here, you need to see a map. See, I believe in maps because they kind of tell you how, not only where things are, but how things fit in together. Here's a map of North and South Korea, right? Now, I have 4 copies. I'm going to pass them around, okay? This is high production values, as you can see. But notice, when you see this, can you sort of see it in the back there? It's sort of in color. So this is South Korea, and this is North Korea, and this is a peninsula. And guess what the peninsula is called? The Korean Peninsula. Who said that? You're going to Harvard. Fantastic. The Korean Peninsula, okay? Now notice here that they have, this is a map, right? And this is South Korea, North Korea, and here's little China. The tiny little China. Now, see, maps are informative, but sometimes they can be misleading. I now would like to show you map number 2. Here's Korea, North and South. Now look at that. There's a slightly different view. Right? Now, what does this view tell you? It tells you 2 things. In terms of size, Korea ain't that big, right? Also, in terms of neighbors, what would you say about the neighbors? Neighbors are bigger. Japan's a little bigger. China's a lot bigger. You're smaller. And then you're divided in half. So you're smaller, and now you're in half smaller. What does that tell you? You're living in a difficult neighborhood. You got to behave yourself. You might be invaded. You might be occupied by these bigger powers, right? Now, a lot of times with my Korean friends, they sometimes act as if the world is the first map. The world is the first map. But the world isn't the first map. The world is this map. What do I mean by that? What am I trying to say when I say the reality of the world is it's the first map, not the second map? What am I trying to say? Totally incomprehensible, huh? What am I trying to say? Anybody? Miss International Relations columnist, what am I trying to say? I'll pick on you today. What am I trying to say?
That they think of the world as it's just themselves and it's
There you go. Perfect. That's exactly right. You're going to Harvard. You're surrounded that the world revolves around Korea, right? But if you look at the map, what's your first name again? Yeah, Emily. Emily, you look at the second map, right? And what do you say? You're just a small part of a much bigger picture. And probably what China's interest has like a magnetic pull on Korea, Japan, Russia, right? It's a very, very complicated problem. Then you take the Korean Peninsula, which someone very cleverly pointed out is the name of the peninsula that the two Koreas on. It's the Korean Peninsula. And you look at that and you say, two Koreas. Now, are they different or the same? Is North Korea and South Korea pretty much the same and they get along real well? Or different and they don't get along too well? Emily, what do you think?
They're different, they don't get along.
They're different and they don't get along too well. The North is basically, well, there's a lot of different names for the North. I made a little list here. If I dropped all my, this is a very funny dais. It allows you to drop things without very much difficulty at all. I just came up with some names that I use in the literature. You see these books up here. These are some of the books that I used to prepare our talk. But, let's see. One of them is the Hermit Kingdom. Hermit Kingdom, they call it North Korea because it designedly isolates itself. Military dictatorship, a failed state, an anachronism, the last Stalinist state. I guess I can't write on this, huh? But Chuje, I mispronounced it, but Chuje, self-reliant state, Chuje junkie, the failed bargain, geopolitical orphan. You know, I thought that it would be interesting to you to, now this is my third map of the Koreas, okay? And let's see if I got this, yeah. I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to have to pass this out. Let me pass these out. This is the hardest to see. This is where one time I could use a projector, but I didn't realize it would be quite that hard to see. Okay, but this is a NASA aerial photograph of Korea at night. Korea at night. Now, here is Japan. Lots of lights. Anybody ever been to Japan? Tokyo, the Ginza? They have lights in the Ginza? Unbelievable, right? Okay, there's Japan. Okay, there's South Korea. What's this? North Korea. No lights. Why? Religion? They're having wild sex and they want the lights off? Why no lights in North Korea? They have electricity. There's one spot here, little dot there, that's Pyongyang, the capital. Right? That's what the West, that's what people from America and the West see, Pyongyang, but at night. But then you see, but you can't see here, but when it comes around, you'll see there's two little lights there. Now what are those? Do you know what they are? They're two different groups of North Koreans trying to escape North Korea at night with a flashlight. And they're heading for the Chinese border like this. Right? There you see it. No, you'll see it right there. There's two little dots. Right there. There they are. You know who they are. You've got files on them. So see that? So that kind of tells you something, doesn't it? That picture. So I say a picture's worth 1,000 words. I'm sorry. Picture's worth 1,000 words. What does that picture tell you? Mimi, you studied economic development and international development. What does that picture tell us?
More development.
Yeah, I mean it's obvious, right? South Korea is way, way, way ahead of North Korea, right? Now, why is that? What is the reason for that? Anybody know what the reason for that is? That's partly right. They opened up to the West, and of course, North Korea, as we know, we said is a country that believes in self-reliance, right? And that's, as you can tell from that picture, that philosophy has worked out really, really well. You know, and where is that? Well, anyway, I lost my order here when it fell off. But so South Korea has, which after the Korean War, remember you all know the Korean War, right? There was a war in Korea, right? Okay, you know that, right? Does anyone not know what the Korean War is? Okay, so all right, we don't have to do that because that's 20 minutes. But basically, what you have now is a division of Korea into North and South, and the North has retained the communist structure of the former Soviet Union, and is sometimes referred to, another name for North Korea is the last Stalinist state, because it's modeled after, in a kind of Korean way, of the totalitarian regime of Stalin and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Now, as you all know, Soviet Union worked out really great too, didn't it? Right? Right, Emily? What happened in 1989? It collapsed. So it didn't work out too well, right? So, but I guess they didn't notice that in North Korea because they kept going as if things were just great, okay? And South Korea said, well, we're not going to do that. And South Korea went from what we would call an authoritarian capitalist development system and morphed into a democracy, which it has now. With the result that South Korea's economy soared to where a country of roughly 47 million, right, Father? 48 million, South Korea, is now in the top 10 economies of the world. Little South Korea, right? And the North is one of the worst economies. I think they fight it out with a few African countries and with Burma for being the most messed up economy. Now, one of the differences between North and South Korea is South Korea developed a capitalist development, centralized at first, and still centralized pretty much, as opposed to the North, which stayed with the communist planning directed model. The result of that and the isolation of the North has led to a situation in the North that is described by people who have been there as a place that is very, very strange. And that's why I use the term occult state. But it is a very bizarre place, and it's very difficult for us to understand. And there has, of course, been tremendous tension between North and South. And I thought that this is a very famous cover. Any of you read a magazine called The Economist? Economist, hands up. What's your name?
Madeline?
Madeline, what's The Economist? Is it only about economics?
No, it's like a global summary of news.
It's like it's a weekly out of London. So I have to tell you, it's a little bit of a British bias. Just a little bit of a British bias. You got to live with that. But it is well written because it's in English, and they know a lot about English in London. And they're very sharp, and it's very international, and it's about politics, economics, business, and a little bit of culture. So The Economist in the year 2000, when the great late Kim Dae-jung went to the North to try and begin the process of peace, the year 2000, The Economist decided, of course, they had to have a cover story, which is the main story of the magazine, on this event. So this is the cover that they did. How's your eyesight back there? Can you see it? This says, "Greetings, Earthlings." And this is The Economist, which is the most serious political magazine in English. And here's a picture. Anyone know who that is? Who is that? Yeah, who is he? Runs a grocery store or what? He runs a grocery store in South, what?
He's like the authoritative.
The dear leader, the number one in North Korea. There's this picture with "Greetings, Earthlings." Now, what is the number one Western political magazine? Thank you, Madeline, for putting up with me. What is the number one political magazine? I'll be right back. Don't get nervous. In the world trying to say with that cover? It's a really weird place, and we don't know that much about it. And part of the reason is because Western intelligence services, and these gentlemen know more about that than I do, and even the intelligence services of South Korea have had only limited success, I think, in penetrating. It's difficult to penetrate, but it's a weird place. Now, I'm trying to explain to you in the short time that I have why I call it weird. It's not weird because it's Korean, because you're in South Korea, and South Korea is no more weirder than Santa Monica. You know, I mean, but the North is weird. And I mention that because in one of the questions that was put on the flyer for this lecture, they said, did Bill Clinton's trip to North Korea help? And I wanted to address that directly. I think it helped tremendously, as a matter of fact. And I'm neither a fan nor a foe of Bill Clinton, but I think it helped tremendously. Did you know why he went to North Korea? Or at least why we were told he went to North Korea? Right, Emily? There were two journalists, and they were right, and they were both late 20s, early 30s, I think. Right, Mimi? And in fact, one of them was a former student of mine. In fact, one of them was a former TA of mine at UCLA, which basically could have been Mimi. Laura Ling, Lisa's younger sister. And they were poking around on the border, and I think I know what happened, but in any event, they got grabbed by the North Koreans, put in jail in Pyongyang, and they sat there until Bill Clinton showed up. Now, people say Bill Clinton went there to get the ladies out. No, he went there to bring the ladies out, but he really went there to begin the process of the bilateral negotiation between the United States and Pyongyang. But before I get into that, I want to go back to the, greeting Earthlings idea. This is one of my favorite pictures. Outside of every summit conference or big meeting, they always have the group picture, right? And they always show the number one, the cabinet, right? Now, I don't have the group picture. I had it, but it wouldn't help you. I just want to show you the picture of Bill Clinton next to Kim Jong-il. Now, what is your impression of Bill Clinton's personality? It's sort of outgoing, would you say? Charismatic, outgoing, maybe towards younger ladies, too outgoing sometimes, right? But definitely not a quiet, retiring type. What does he look like here? Looks like he's at a funeral. Look at that. Looks like he's so uncomfortable. It's one of my favorite pictures. I'm surprised they didn't put this on the cover of The Economist. And, Clinton and Mars, It's a great picture. It tells, that pictures tell a story. And I'm a print journalist. But I'm telling you, sometimes it's hard for us writers to have the power of a picture. Now, just to show you that it wasn't just Clinton having a bad day, I went back to 2002, and does anybody know who Junichiro Koizumi was? For 5 years, he was Prime Minister of Japan. He was a Clinton type, very outgoing. He was a bachelor, had a girlfriend, very outgoing, very dynamic, very charismatic, had great hair. When I met him, I interviewed him once, fantastic hair. That's why I have this done like this. And a little competitive, And so he went up in 2002. Father, I don't know if you see this picture, Father Daly, to Pyongyang. And here's a picture, Koizumi. And it looks like they kind of, he's being released from prison himself, So this is a very, very strange place, okay? Can I borrow this just a minute? Because I lost mine. Thanks, I'll give it back. Okay? Very strange place. And so that's what we're dealing with. Now, why should we care? Why should we here in Los Angeles, we in the United States, we in America, why should we care that there's this strange place 8,000 miles from us where they don't have much electricity at night, and they've had tremendous starvation, they've had tremendous poverty, lack of development. They had estimated between 100 to 200,000 political prisoners in some of the worst conditions. I could go through the whole list of terrible things about North Korea. Why should we care? It's their problem. They created it. The heck with them. Emily, what do you think?
Because it's only 8,000 miles away, and it's still a close distance.
So the military threat.
Yeah, the military threat, but I mean, still their actions, their day-to-day affects everything we do. I mean, Asia is a market that affects us, or anything that happens in Asia affects that market.
Well, that's actually a sophisticated point. Most people that you would ask that question of, they would say, well, they had these missiles and they could put nuclear weapons on them and they could fly them and hit Palos Verdes. Anybody live in Palos Verdes? Okay, we don't want that to happen. We don't want that to happen. UCLA, I make some terrible mistakes. One time we talked about, and I said, they could hit Fresno, and because I didn't think anybody at UCLA would be from Fresno. 3 students said, oh, we're from Fresno. I said, all right, now I want to hit Fresno. All right? That's the answer you usually get. The fact is that without belittling the North Korean capability, it's still a little bit iffy. First of all, they may have 5 or 10 weapons. No one's really sure. They had a test or 2, and not sure that it really worked that well. And then when they send the missiles up, I don't think they're really sure where they're going to go. Russia, watch out. Oh, over Japan, we're attacking Japan. No, we actually meant to send it, And then sometimes they go like that. So they're still working on the finesse part of their missile system. So right now, if you ask me, The two ladies who live in Palos Verdes, if you have to worry, I'd say not right now. Don't worry, you can play golf at night, no problem whatsoever. Don't worry about the pets, you don't have to build a bomb shelter. You're a bit away from that yet. But of course, if you were Japan, and you have the map, right? Is Japan close to Korea? If you were Japan, and given the fact that, what would you say is the emotional relationship between North Korea and Japan? Be like really good buddies or what? They don't really get along too well. Okay, the professionals do, but there's a history of animosity. What country colonized Japan for much of the 20th, what country gave that away? Colonized Korea for much of the 20th century? Japan. And generally speaking, most countries when they're colonized, they don't say, thank you very much for colonizing us, we've really enjoyed this experience, you know. It's usually the opposite, you know. So there's some tension there. So if you were Japan, even if a missile flew over you that they didn't actually mean to send that way, you'd kind of, what would you say? Whoa, Yuko, we got a problem here, right? So the Japanese have a special perspective on this issue, and they're extremely concerned. And of course, South Korea ought to be concerned, although the nuclear arming that North Korea is doing doesn't appreciably increase the problem for South Korea, because South Korea is under the umbrella of the North's conventional weapons. Now, the North has a huge military. They spend more money on the military than they do on food for the people. And that's one of the problems. What we don't know about their military is how many of those weapons work. Does 100% of their missiles and their mortars work? 80%? 50%? If they shot them up, would they land back on North Korea? Well, we don't know, but wisdom would suggest, right, Emily? Let's not find out. Because Seoul, which is the magnificent capital of South Korea, what, 14 million people in Seoul, 15, something like that, is within 37 to 40 miles, okay, of the border with North Korea, which is heavily armed. And so if there was an attack, even if the North didn't use nuclear weapons, it would be a very severe security concern for South Korea. And of course, South Korea has a history of having fought the Korean War with the American help against the North Koreans. And what other army? Who helped North Korea? China, right? Okay, so you have that. So now you say, well, what about the Chinese? They must be really enjoying all this, right? First of all, the South Koreans, which are American allies, they're kind of worried about the North. And of course, the Japanese are spooked every time a missile flies over them, so that's cool because the Chinese don't like the Japanese, right? So the Chinese are really happy, right? Yes or no? Who said no? Who said no? Why? Why not? What's your name, sir?
Charles Singleton.
Hey, Charles.
One of the things is the Koreans are trying to escape, North Koreans are trying to escape from Japan. And I don't know how much of a problem that is, but I know that's one thing the Chinese are concerned about.
Right, the refugee issue. Right, right. That's one thing. That is a real issue because there are something like, what is it, what's the 23 million in North Korea, we think? I mean, they haven't had a census in a hell of a long time, you know, and half of them are, you know, not standing up because they're malnourished and unhealthy and so on and so forth, but more than 20 million. And so China has a concern that if you had a failed state and millions and millions of Korean refugees would come over the border. Remember the people with the flashlights? Right? But instead of maybe 2, it would be 2 million coming over the border. This would be a problem in a part of China, and the Chinese have enough trouble with how many people are in China? A lot. That's a very intelligent answer. A lot. They claim 1.3 billion. Can you imagine trying to count 1.3 billion? It's, you know, take you a long time. By that time, the number changed. No one really knows, but it's a lot. How many of you have been to Beijing or Shanghai? Right? In the last 5 years? Recently? My first reaction, first time I went to Beijing, and this is a silly reaction, but it was a reaction, is I got off the plane and went to downtown and packed my hotel and started walking around, and I said, oh my God, where did all these Chinese people come from? They're all over the place. You can't walk, you know, you can't walk anywhere, and it's Chinese people. You know, and then I realized, whoa, baby, imagine having to feed those mouths, provide health care, make sure they're not in the streets rallying against the government. Maybe Beijing has enough to do without having to solve the North Korean issue. Maybe it would like North Korea to go away or not be a problem or not implode. So China actually is not happy with the North Korean situation. They would be happy if North Korea would be reasonably successful and not be an embarrassment and not be spawning refugees and not be developing nuclear weapons and not complicating its relationship with the United States and not, in fact, complicating its relationship with South Korea. Let me ask you this, Pacific Palos Verdes girls, listen now. Let me ask you this. What is China's what, #2 trading partner? Is South Korea. China does a hell of a lot of trading with South Korea. And South Korea does a hell of a lot of trading with China. So if you're China and you say the way to keep us in power is to build our economy, right? And as long as our economy is building and people are being fed, all 1.3 billion or so, and some of them are getting cars, and some of them are getting houses, and things are getting better, we're going to stay in power. If more and more people are not being fed, there are no cars, we're all in poverty, what's going to happen to us? The same thing that happened to the communists in the Soviet Union. You're going to be an ex-government. So you want to keep the economy going, right? And so what's really important to you? Your economic allies. And South Korea is an economic ally, right? In fact, I don't know that anybody agrees with this except myself, but if you went to the Chinese government and you said, okay, I am God, and tomorrow you have to choose, you can only have either North Korea as a friend or South Korea as a friend. You can only have one. You choose. You can't have both. I'll tell you, man, if I was running China, I'd say, get rid of the North. They're a pain in the neck. They're just problems. They don't do anything for us. The only thing they do for us is they give us a buffer. And China is always big on having buffers. Buffers are kind of like padding that offensive linemen wear, you know, like ways of, you know, insulating yourself from a country that might be hostile. So it has been a useful buffer, but lately it's been a pain in the neck buffer. So I think it was Emily said, but Emily gave a sophisticated answer to the issue of why we should care about the situation. Because the stability of Korea is essential to the stability of East Asia. And the stability of East Asia has been the platform on which you've had one of the greatest growth stories of economies in the history of the world. You have seen China go from a country that had no wealth to a country which, if it keeps going, if it keeps going, what did I say back there? If it keeps going at that trajectory, will surpass quantitatively the overall size of the American economy at a certain point, okay? The East Asian economic miracle, the rise of South Korea and Singapore and Taiwan. What's the other tiger, Mimi? What? Hong Kong. Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan. Relatively little economies, though Japan is a monster. Japan economy still, for all its problems, is the #2 economy in the world. Where was Japan in 1945? It was a parking lot. It was a mall parking lot. It had done the one thing that major powers cannot afford to do. It lost a world war. And also, two cities had nuclear weapons dropped on them. The only cities that have had nuclear weapons dropped on them by us, by the U.S. That's a whole controversial issue. But the fact was, Japan went from being a first world country to a third world. It was poorer than many third world countries. But through industry, through the help of the Americans, and through a lot of other factors, its economy roared. Now what do you see from Japan? You see some of the best cars. How many of you have Japanese cars? Okay, how many have Korean cars? Okay, how many have American cars? How many have American cars that work? Do you remember how the Americans, we complained, remember how we complained about Japan was like, you know, it was illegally competing against American cars? What was their secret evil strategy? They built cars that worked. You know, you put the key in and they would start. You press on the brake and they would stop. And when you're driving, the hubcaps wouldn't fall off. That was illegal competition. And so what did Americans do? They said, I guess I'll buy a car that works. And that was the rise of the Japanese automotive industry. And certainly one of the most brilliant corporations ever is Toyota. A lot of your electronic equipment, your sound systems and so on, your CD players and so forth, as you know, come with Japanese multinational labels on them. So that whole rise of the economy and the interdependence of the economies and the creation of wealth was dependent upon peace and stability. Now you hear a lot, those of you who are going to go into international relations, that phrase peace and stability. On the one hand, it's kind of like a vanilla phrase, doesn't mean too much. But actually it's a very profound phrase. And what it means is, in the absence of war, where relations are on the whole positive, and that's what these gentlemen do. They worry about relations between states, representing their government. Here on the West Coast, that's what the diplomats do. They say, no war, let's negotiate, let's have peace, let's talk, let's improve. We don't have to fight over this. We don't have to drop nuclear weapons over this. In that environment, you have peace and stability, and you had this incredible economic rise. Now, all of you here are too young to understand it. I, of course, was born in the 17th century. So I've seen all of this. And this recent development of the East Asian miracle and the economy and the rise of Japan is relatively new. For you all, you couldn't not remember when there was a bad Toyota, you know, and you didn't have a Sony and so on and so forth. It's relatively new in the great chiseled structure of time. So the American interest is in managing peace and stability because it's in our economic benefit. So Emily, you're right. Now, what would be one other reason why America would have, well, you as Americans would have, besides an academic or, I mean, I would be interested in Asia if it weren't important. I find it a fascinating place, but it is very strategically important. And I'm going to point out to you a book later that makes the point that Asia will be the America of the 21st century. Just as the 19th century was the European century, just as the 20th century was the American century, that the 21st century will be the Asian century. That's the argument of Kishore Mahbubani. But from the American perspective, there's another reason for caring about what happens on the Korean Peninsula, with North Korea, with East Asia, with Asian peace and stability. And what would that be? Let's give Emily a break. I've been beating up on her. Some guy, come on, some guy. Anybody? Well, yeah, we don't want nuclear war, and of course China's a nuclear power. Japan allegedly is not. North Korea allegedly is. South Korea is not, we believe. But that's right. I would, if you put that on the exam, correct. But I'm looking for something else. Okay. Watch me now a minute. Imagine for a moment that we are not political scientists. Imagine for a moment that we are astronomers. What do we know about the universe? The universe has a sun, right? It's a really hot thing. Don't want to get too close, you burn up, right? Mercury must be really one hell of a place. What kind of sunblock you'd have to use there, I have no idea. Pluto would be really not a good place to get a good tan, right? But the ones in the middle, they get more sun, and they all, what do they all do? Does the sun revolve around no. The planets, right? They revolve around the sun, right? So if I had chalk here, I would do like that, the sun, and then the planets revolve around the sun, right? Now, one beauty of that system is there's one sun and these planets. And all the planets have to do is two things. Don't get too close or too far from the sun, and don't run into one another. That would not be cool, right? So they all have their little orbits, and everything is cool, and they're very comfortable with it. But then there's a big geopolitical change in the world system. And it's the approach of a second sun. I don't mean sun like father-daughter sun. I mean S-U-N. And the second sun is moving in closer and closer, right? And getting bigger and bigger, right? And as that second sun moves in, what now happens to to the gravitational pull on all of those planets. It changes. That's exactly right. It's no more complicated than that. It changes. And for each planet, it changes in a different way. So now the problem for the planets is a little more complicated, right? Not only do they have to kind of figure out how to, revolve around the sun without getting too close, too far away, and not hitting one another, but now they have to do what as the second sun moves in? They got to figure out how to not get too close to the second sun and burn up to a crisp, and they have to change their orbit, don't they? They have to adjust their trajectory. They have to make fundamental changes. That's the metaphor of the two suns. Now, who's the second sun in the international system? Pacific Palisades, Palos Verdes. Who's the second sun? What if the first sun is the United States, the superpower? Who would be? You got it. Come on, China. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. China's moving in, and what is that doing to all the other countries? Changing their orbit. They have to adjust, right? They don't want to get too close and burn into the United States. They don't want to get too close and burn into China. They have to adjust their orbit. It's more complicated. It's more difficult. Now, if you're the United States and you were the only sun, right? And now, you're like, you were Hertz and there was no Avis. You were Time Magazine and no Newsweek. Who's your number one rival here at LMU? Sports rival. LMU and no Pepperdine. All of a sudden, Pepperdine's in the picture. Now you got to play in the basketball, football, and everything else. How do you feel? Who said that? You're exactly right. Threatened is how you feel. Do you like it? No. I liked it the old way. We were the only sun. I was very happy with that. Why do we need two suns? More sunblock, more problems, everything was fine, right? The United States now is being challenged. And it is believed that China, if keeps going. You know what China is like, by the way? Just so look. China is, you've all been air travel. You've all been on a 747, right? The biggest jetliner that's in operation, the 747. It's my favorite plane, actually. But have you ever noticed how long it takes for a 747 to get off a runway? In fact, sometimes if you're the nervous type like me, and you haven't had a few drinks, right? You say, these things are going to take off. We've been on the runway here going along for a long time. And then all of a sudden, as you see the fence, which marks the end of the runway in the airport, all of a sudden it goes up. You say, I live, I do not die, right? And then it keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. Okay, keeps going. We're going to go to pizza in a minute, okay? What is the one thing that 747 can't afford to do? Slow down. Because if it slows down, it crashes. China is a 747. Has to keep going. Has to maintain the airspeed. All right? Now, I'll go back to my final point. We're going to pizza and Coke, and then those of you who would like to ask questions, please come back. There will be the reward, but let me make my final point. Final point is this. The United States now is even more interested in Asia because of the rise of China. When Japan rose, we were concerned, but Japan was an ally, and Japan was an economic partner. China comes from a whole different place. Now, you got two big elephants on the block, and they're trying to jostling for who is the biggest elephant, in the jungle. And it could get interesting, and it could get bumpy. So the American interest now, which always was in China, in Asia for good reasons, now is interest plus because of China. Let's take a break.
Please join us for our next lecture. For a complete schedule, visit our website at www.cba.lmu.edu/cab.